And I'm going to walk you through everything. This is a decent amount, so the video might be long, but just kind of hang with me. It says calculate values for x and y. So I look at this picture, and I have two intersecting lines, and I see that there are x's here and x's here. So I'm going to focus on those first. Those two angles are vertical. Vertical angles are congruent, right? That's what I'm saying here in the red. The red is the geometry, and then you're like, oh, well, if they're equal, then let's set them equal. So I set 8x minus 1 equal to 6x plus 13. Then I do algebra, and I get x equals 7. Well, once you get x equals 7, you can plug it in to x. And then you can say, well, 8 times 7 is 56. 56 minus 1 is 55. Well, I know this angle is 55, which also means I know this angle is 55. Vertical angles are congruent. Well, once you know this is 55, don't you know that this one over here has to be 125? These two angles are linear pairs. We know linear pairs add up to 180. But once you know that this is 125, you can say this. This angle must equal 125. So take 4y plus 21 and set it equal to 125. And then use algebra to solve. And now I have y and I have x. Similar on number 2. Number 2, if you look at it, we want to find w and v, but then we also at the very end want to find that angle. Okay, so we look here and we see some v's and we see some w's. So I'm going to focus on the two that are the same, just like I did up there. I focused on x first up there. I'm going to focus on the v's. How are these two angles related? Well, they're linear pairs. That's what I say right here. These two angles are linear pairs. What do we know about a linear pair? Linear pairs add up to 180. So take 9v plus 15 plus 2v and equal 180 and get that equation. Once you get this equation, you can just solve using algebra and you get v equals 15. Once you know v is 15, you can plug it back in. You can plug it in both spots if you want. Plug in 15 up here and plug in 15 down here. You now know that this angle is 150 and this angle is 30. Oh, look at that. They make 180. That even makes sense. Now, how would we find this angle? Well, how are these two angles related? These two angles are vertical. They're congruent, which means if this angle is 150, this angle has to be 150, which lets me write this equation. This angle equals 150, and then I solve and I get w. And then the last one is, well, find the measure of angle WDTZ. WTZ is talking about this angle. Well, that angle is vertical with this angle. So if this is 30, that's got to be 30. So WTZ has to be 30 degrees. All right, when you do this one, the first thing you want to do is for sure draw it. Draw it first. So draw a line P and a line Q and then draw a transversal M. That's what this says right here. Then I label stuff. A pair of corresponding angles. And it doesn't matter which ones. I just drew top left and top left. Is that and that. And the angle that's vertical with this one, label it as that. Okay, so I went vertical and I labeled it. But what do we know about vertical angles? Vertical angles are congruent. Now, doesn't this one equal that one? Doesn't this have to be the same? Again, you can say vertical. You can also say, really, I shouldn't have said vertical. I really should have said alternate interior, but vertical is fine. These two angles aren't vertical, but this angle here is congruent to this angle here, and this angle is congruent to that angle. So really, these two have to be the same. But that's really the same thing as saying they're alternate interiors. Either way, this guy is equal to that guy, and so that's what I did. I set them equal, and I solved. I found a y value of -5. I plugged it back in, right? Plug it back into this y. So I'm taking -5, and I'm plugging it in back for y. And that told me that this angle is 130. But if this angle is 130, this angle is 130. They're corresponding. So set that equal to 130. Once you know that's 130, make it equal to 130. And then solve, and I get x. And now I know y, and now I know x, and I've answered the question. Use this diagram. Okay, so here's my thought process. I want a relationship between D and G. D and G. But D and G, there's no word for them. They're not alternate interior, they're not alternate exterior, they're not corresponding, they're not vertical, they're not a linear pair. However, I do know they add up to 180, and here's why. D and H are the same. They're corresponding. But H and G add up to 180. Well, if D and H are the same, and H plus G equals 130, well then D plus G equals 180. They have to, considering these two are the same. Now, A and E, well, there's a name for them. A and E are actually corresponding, so the equation would just be A equals E. Again, you're going to have a whole lot of 180s and a whole lot of equals, and you have to decide what angles are equal and what angles add up to 180. Okay, so I wrote this. You see these blue angles? Those are congruent. Well, and the red angles are congruent. Well, isn't the red and the blue 180, and isn't this red and blue 180? Well, think about it. That just means that this guy and that guy, since one's blue and one's red, and we know blue and red have to be 180, that's what I did. I added them up, and I set them equal to 180. And then I solved for W. And once you know W, you can plug it back in. It looks like I took that W value and put it back in for W, which I did here, and got 68. But then once you know 68, then you know that angle is 68, and that was the question. Find the measure of angle GCB. GCB, this angle. But that angle and that angle have to be the same. That's the easiest one. Remember, for all triangles, this is true. Take the three angles, add up to 180. So 41 plus 90 plus what equals 180, and we can subtract and get, oh, that angle must be 49. I'm going to call that the triangle sum theorem. The sum of the three interior angles have to be 180 degrees. All right, we're going to do that same thing. This is the triangle sum theorem. So I'm going to focus on this triangle first. And I know that this angle plus this angle plus this angle equals 180. So that's what I did. This plus this equals 180, and then I solved. And I got x equals 40. Well, once you know x equals 40, you can plug it back in. We can take that value and put it there, and put it there. I can take all those values of x and just figure out what they are. So 47, 102, and 31. But I also can plug that same x value in here and here. And that says that this is 61 and this is 57. But now I can focus on this triangle. I also know that it adds up to 180. So 61 plus 57 plus y equals 180, and then I can solve for y. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones because it kind of has three things in it. So this first one, it says this is 6x minus 11. Boom. Don't we know that that angle also has to be 6x minus 11 because they're vertical? If this angle is 24, boom, don't we know that one has to be 56 because these are linear pairs? But then we're like, oh, here's another triangle. 56 plus 6x minus 11 plus 5x plus 3 has to equal 180. So write that equation. Boom plus boom plus boom equals 180, and then solve. Okay, so we have a little vertical, we have a little linear pair, and we have the fact that the triangle adds up to 180. All right, M and N are parallels. That is a given piece. That's pretty important. But it's kind of the same thing. These two angles up here. Oh, I don't like that. This has to be 80, considering that's 80. And then what do we know about these? Well, that forms a triangle. Let's see if I can get, there we go. There's my triangle up here. Those three angles, boom, 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 well, they have to add up to 180. So that's what I did over here. I took the three angles and I added them up to 180. I solved and got x equals 11. Once you get x equals 11, you can say, all right, just take that value and put it in for x. 3 times 11 minus 8 is 25. Once this is 25, you're like, well, that guy way down here also has to be 25. This and this, right, they're corresponding angles. They're on the bottom right of that transversal. And since lines are parallel, corresponding angles are congruent. So if that's 25 degrees, that other dot's 25 degrees. All right, last but not least, so if this is 34, that has to be 34. Those are vertical. Vertical angles are congruent. If this is 82, this has to be 98, which is also the same thing as saying that has to be 82. These are alternate interiors. Alternate interiors are congruent. But if that's 34, that's got to be 34. These angles are corresponding. And then you're like, well, I also have a triangle. I know that inside the triangle, they have to add up to 360. So 82, 64 plus what equals 180. And then you can figure out that that has to be 64 degrees. Okay, looking back on this worksheet, we had some triangle sum, linear pairs, vertical angles, all the stuff with transversals, whether it's alternate exterior, alternate interior, consecutive interiors, or corresponding angles. Okay, if you take those 6 things, those 6 big angle relationships plus the triangle sum, you can do this worksheet. But pretty much you have to decide, how are these angles related? Oh, they're vertical, so set them equal. Why? Well, because we know vertical angles are congruent. What about these 2 angles? Well, they're a linear pair. What do we know about a linear pair? They add up to 180, so add them up to 180. So I would encourage you to use this video, kind of help walk you through some of these ideas and problems, but certainly practicing the reviews we did will prepare you for the test.